Stand. Almighty God, we pray for your blessing upon this council. Help and prosper its work for the advancement and benefit of its people, so that peace and happiness, unity and justice may be established amongst us all. Amen. Manningham City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land we now know as Manningham. We pay our respects to Wurundjeri elders, past and present, and value the ongoing contribution to the cultural heritage of Manningham. Manningham Council would also like to acknowledge the contribution made to Manningham over the years by people of diverse backgrounds and cultures. I'd like to welcome all members of the public joining us online to observe our proceedings tonight. As a result of the recent 5-day lockdown and current COVID restrictions that remain in place, members of the community are not yet permitted to attend council meetings in person. Subject to further easing of restrictions, we anticipate being able to invite the community back to the chamber for our March council meeting. We'll keep you up to date with those arrangements on our website. We are still taking questions though from the public and encourage you to submit your questions in accordance with our normal practices. As you cannot be here to read your question in person, our CEO will read the question for you and a response will be provided where we have the information to hand. If we're unable to provide a meaningful response, we'll take your question on notice and provide a response in writing. We will deal with a maximum of 2 questions per person and 2 questions on any one issue. If you have more than 2 questions, please submit these additional questions in writing through the normal channels. Council meetings are governed by Manningham's governance rules. I'll introduce each item of business as listed on the agenda, calling it by number and reading it by the title. I will then call for a mover and a seconder of a motion on the item before opening any debate. Only councillors can join the debate on any item. Councillors may adopt the officer's recommendations in the report or propose amendments and supplementary motions. Item 2, apologies and requests for leave of absence. There are no apologies. Item 3, prior notification of conflict of interest. No prior notifications of conflict of interest have been received. Councillors, would anyone like to give notice of a conflict of interest now? Thank you. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover? Councillor Laura Main.
I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 28th of January 2021 be confirmed.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kleinert. I will put that motion. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Presentations. There are no presentations. Item 6, petitions. Joint letter road safety at Ruffy Street, Templestowe. Do I have a mover?
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that the joint letter with 55 signatories expressing concerns over road safety and possible risk of serious injury at the intersection of the Ruffy Creek Trail and Ruffy Street, Templestowe, be received and referred through to the appropriate officer for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen Main. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Kleinert, Councillor Stephen Main, would you like to speak to it at all?
I'd just like to thank Eve Duncan, a local resident near Ruffy Street, for putting together this petition of 55 signatories, and makes a very strong case, I think, for some traffic calming measures on Ruffy Street, whether it's 1 or 2 speed humps, given the increasing rat run of people seeking to avoid the Templestowe Village traffic jam at peak hour and use Porter Street to access the Fitzsimmons Lane roundabout through the quiet residential streets. The petition points out that Ruffy Street actually crosses the Ruffy Creek Trail, and that there may well be a case for a pedestrian signal or pedestrian crossing there, as well as traffic calming with speed humps. We have several hundred speed humps in Manningham. It's not always that easy to decide which houses they go in front of, and Ruffy Street is not a particularly well-made street, so it's not an easy or an obvious one to put a speed hump in. But the officers are looking at this. I think it's quite a compelling petition, and happy to table it tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen Mayne. Councillor Kleinert, would you like to say anything further? Any other councillors like to speak to the motion? There being no other speakers, I will put that motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 7, public question time. There are no questions from the public for tonight's meeting. Item 8, admission of urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. Item 9, planning permit applications. There are no planning permit applications. Item 10, city planning and community. Item 10.1, planning scheme amendment C127MANN and planning permit application PLN 20/03/674-680 Doncaster Road, 674 to 680 Doncaster Road, 2 Short Street and 14A, 16 and 18 Hepburn Road, Doncaster Church of Christ, seeking authorisation for public exhibition. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Laura Mayne.
I'd like to move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
I'd like to second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Laura Mayne, would you like to speak to the motion?
This motion is to amend the Manningham planning scheme for a planning application at 674 to 680 Doncaster Road for a 177 dwelling 17-storey development. Amending the planning scheme allows the proposed development to be increased from a 13-storey development, therefore increasing the height limit above the maximum limit. This development is unique to Manningham as it offers a 600-person auditorium, community space, a childcare centre, a place of worship and retention of heritage works. These types of aspects are not on offer on an average Doncaster Hill development and will be a great addition to the community and help improve the livability of many Manningham residents. The decision to amend a planning scheme is to improve the aesthetics of the Doncaster skyline, increase overall dwellings and notably increase the amount of affordable housing dwellings from 6 to 10, which is important as affordable housing cannot be overlooked in Manningham. A decision to amend the planning scheme is thoroughly considered and thought through and does not form a new precedent for any future planning applications on Doncaster Hill. Overall, the application is of high urban design and architectural quality and will contribute positively to the visual amenity of Doncaster Hill as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mayne. Councillor Lang, would you like to talk to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor and fellow councillors. I also agree with what Councillor Laura Mayne said, that we support this motion. I'm actually really interested to see the community consultation feedback regarding this activity centre zoned 177 substantial mixed-use development. I believe there are some positives that we can perceive with this development, as it seems to have good setbacks, it seems to have terrific beneficial public value, and it has complementary design elements. With this mixed-use complex, the public value is sought through the facilities that it provides. As Councillor Laura Mayne said, it's cafes, offices, meeting places, childcare facility, place of assembly, even a substantial theatre complex for our Manningham community, as well as then residential suites. The residential component also provides a variety of 2 and 3 bedroom units and at least 10 dwellings allocated to affordable housing. The complementary design elements make this substantial multi-use complex attractive to look at, and it blends in with the natural and historical surroundings, incorporating brick form to complement the church brickwork, light render and beige off-white colour tones to blend in with the sky and clouds, vertical cladding with clear and obscure glass glazing for light and a blending of the structure. Therefore, I encourage Council to authorise this planning amendment for the Minister of Planning, and I also encourage Council to authorise this to go out to public exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Would anyone else like to speak against the motion? Would anyone like to add to what's been said? Councillor Stephen Mayne.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also enthusiastically supportive of this recommendation. It is unusual to go with a planning scheme amendment related to one single site, particularly where you're adding the height by 4 levels to 17 levels in a zone that has a mandatory height limit. So normally in this situation you'd say warning bells, why are we reaching in and doing a single site planning scheme amendment, particularly when the council plans to do an overall review of the planning controls on Doncaster Hill, boundary zones, heights, etc., over the course of this current 4-year term. But then when you read the report, I think it makes a compelling case. It's done in a very transparent manner. As Councillor Laura May mentioned, the 600-seat plus Performing Arts Centre will be the biggest and the best in Manningham, and there are many councils around Australia who've spent tens of millions of dollars building a performing arts centre owned by themselves too. So to have one delivered, available to the community through a private development is a very positive development. It's not just another residential tower on Doncaster Hill, it's a genuine mixed-use site. The developers or the applicants in this situation are unusual. It's the Church of Christ in partnership with 2 individuals who also are unusual to come to an application table like this, in Peter Clark, the former immediate Mayor of Nillumbik, a former City of Melbourne councillor, and Ashley Fenn, who I think was at one time a Family First Senate candidate who I ran against back in the day in 2010. And so they've partnered up with the church in a very innovative proposal. We should be transparent, and we are being transparent later on in saying that we had a consultation meeting with Mr Clark and representatives of the church with officers present in this room to discuss the proposal. I found the discussion very useful and I found the arguments very compelling. Yes, 17 stories is high. This will be one of the highest buildings on Doncaster Hill. It is near the top of the ridgeline. But compare that to Box Hill, where the listed company Vicinity Centres is currently proposing a 48-level residential tower at Box Hill. So us going from mandatory 14 to 17 in the context of 48 levels at Box Hill demonstrates that this is a relatively marginal change and not an extreme use of a planning scheme amendment. So overall, I'd like to thank the officers for working tirelessly on this proposal and being quite flexible. And I think everyone has acted very professionally and openly, and I do hope this proposal is delivered, particularly because of the quality design and the substantial public benefit from the community facilities, as mentioned in the report, particularly that Performing Arts Centre, which would be great to have here, so we're not travelling over to Maroondah or the centre in Ivanhoe for school concerts and school balls and stuff. We've actually got a big venue right next to us here on Doncaster Hill. Would be a terrific addition, so very much wish the church and their developer partners the best of luck in actually getting this project built.
Thank you, Councillor Stephen Mayne. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Goff.
Just clarification, Mr Mayor. I thought this was just to exhibit it and go to the minister, not to vote on or to discuss the actual application and the details of the application. I thought, am I wrong in that?
No, that's correct. That's my understanding. Thank you for clarifying. Would anyone else like to speak against the motion or for the motion? There being no further speakers, I will put that motion to the councillors. Those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 10.2, the Manningham Public Toilet Plan, endorsement of final plan. Do I have a mover? Councillor Chen.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Chen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I understand that public toilets is not a legislative requirement for local governments. Am I correct? Yes? But public toilets improve local amenity and support social activities within the municipality. Manningham Public Toilet Plan is a 10-year plan to ensure safe, accessible, and well-maintained public toilets are available across Manningham to support community participation in public life. The draft plan was on public exhibition for 5 weeks in August and September last year. Feedback was generally favourable and supportive. Officers considered the community feedback, the criteria and objective of the plan, and made a key change to involve a new toilet facility at the Doncaster Shopping Centre at Blackburn Road. Mr. Mayor, currently there are 39 council public toilets, 13 public toilets provided by Parks Victoria, private shopping centres and businesses. If the plan is approved by council tonight, there will be 11 new public toilets constructed over a 10-year period. 5 existing toilets will be opened up to the public, which means over the next 10 years, guess what? There will be 16 more public toilets in our municipality. Council will also upgrade 7 older style toilets to improve safety and be gender inclusive. 3 existing public toilets will be replaced to more modern standards. The estimated cost, now we come to the cost, of implementing the plan is more than $5 million over 10 years. Once all the new facilities are operational, we have the maintenance cost. There will be a further $16,500 annual maintenance cost to council. Public toilets are a necessity, not a convenience. I ask my fellow councillors' support to this 10-year public toilet plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chen. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had very much the same things to say as Councillor Anna Chen, so I won't repeat those. But out of the community consultation period, it did come out that our community really want clean, frequent, accessible and well-maintained public toilets to utilise, and I believe that this plan delivers that. Therefore, I encourage Council to support this recommendation because clean, frequent and well-maintained toilets facilities are essential and important to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Would anyone else like to speak against the motion?
Someone spoken against it?
No. I mean, would anyone like to speak against the motion? Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Goff. And everyone speaking against, would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Stephen May.
My only brief comment, Mr. Mayor, is it's an excellent report, but why do we have to take 10 years? So the budget's 5.28 million. We know what we want to do. Let's just do it in 5. So when it comes to budget coming up, rather than dribbling out 500k a year, why not do $1 million a year for 5 years? The only difference in cost on a 10-year perspective is interest foregone on the cash that was in the bank, which is 0.5% or something, and the economies of scale you get from bulk buying, group procuring on an accelerated program would be significant, and the bring forward of the spend also obviously adds to the amenity and the benefit for the community who have access to the public toilet. So a great plan, and let's actually get it funded mostly during this term when we first sit down to do our 21-22 budget in a few weeks' time.
Thank you. So you're not proposing an amendment to the motion, and we will proceed. Is there anyone else like to speak to the motion? I will put the motion there. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously again. Thank you, councillors. Item 10.3, Healthy City and Access and Equity Advisory Committee's options paper. Do I have a mover for the motion?
I'd like to move an alternate motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lightbody. Would you like to explain the alternate motion?
Yep. Sorry, I thought someone had to second it first. I'd move that the officer's recommendations be adopted with the following change. A new point D will be inserted, which reads, D, commits to establishing new committees specifically focusing on but not limited to, multicultural communities, LGBTIQ+, and gender equality. All subsequent points be renumbered accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Lightbody. Do I have a seconder for the alternate motion?
I will, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
Diamante, thank you. Councillor Lightbody, would you like to talk to the alternate motion?
Yes. I think the amendment to this motion ensures that we are accurately representing our communities, and by ending the Access and Equity Committee, we are committing to looking after those communities that it focused on in the future through new specific committees.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Councillor Lightbody. Councillor Diamante, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my very strong wish, Mr. Mayor, is that we don't need a committee to focus on gender equality, and that we don't need a committee to focus on LGBTQI+. My very strong wish is that we don't need programs to drive gender equality because we've achieved it, and that we don't need programs to drive true inclusion and acceptance across the LGBTQI community. Sadly, I do think it's a generational change. And when I say generational change, I do believe that we're not going to reach that true equality until perhaps when my children are adults. And so with that in mind, I really do support the need to have committees that have that singular focus on the complexities of gender equality, the complexities of LGBTQI+, the complexities of multiculturalism, and disability, which is coming up. So I absolutely do support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Diamante. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would anyone else like to speak for the motion or to the motion? There being no further speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 10.4, Disability Advisory Committee Membership Recommendations. Do I have a mover? Councillor Kleinert.
That the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Diamante. Councillor Kleinert, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, in June 2020, Council resolved to endorse the establishment of a new Disability Advisory Committee, and this comes out of what was then the current Access and Equity, which housed many groups, disability being one of them. It was a great move of Council to provide a new committee, which will comprise of 80% of people with a disability and 20% of family or carers to those of persons of a disability. They represent diversity and intersexuality, including age, gender, sexuality and cultural background. It's great to see that it was actually oversubscribed in when the EOI process went out in October last year, and there was more. It was actually double the amount of people applied throughout Manningham, and it was a great process with yourself, the Mayor, and also Councillor De Monte, who sat down and were on the panel to decide that very hard task of who becomes part of this new committee. So tonight we're really endorsing the membership recommendations. This committee will provide advice to Council on how to understand and respond to the needs of people with a disability, build member capacity and support community to be more accessible and inclusive here in Manningham. So I just ask that we all recommend and endorse this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kleinert. Councillor Diamante. Nothing further? Would anyone else like to speak? Would anyone like to speak against the motion first? And would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Thank you, Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would like to acknowledge that there was a very keen interest and passionate applicants. It is really important that Council understand how to respond to the needs of people with disability, and I support the recommendation from the councillor committee regarding the preferred applicants, but I'd also like to say thank you to all those treasured applicants for their informative submissions and their passion towards inclusiveness in Manningham.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I will therefore put that motion. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 11, City Services. 11.1, Reformed Municipal Emergency Management Planning Committee. Do I have a mover? Councillor Goff.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that the recommendation be adopted in Part A of a recommendation, and in Part D that Councillor Carly Lang be appointed to the MEMPC as Manningham's non-voting member of the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Goff. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Whitebody? Councillor Goff, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I suppose it's a very important motion that has come up to Council tonight, because it actually changes how Council interacts in emergency situations and the responsibilities of that. And it occurs, as is quite clearly stated in the motion here, through legislation of the state government on the 1st of December last year that repealed a certain part of the Act and replaced it to facilitate, and we're following through that, facilitating the establishment of an independent, and as I say, an independent emergency management committee, planning committee for our Manningham area. And we're tonight enabling that process to occur. And indeed, the responsibility, rather than being a committee of council, responsible to council and reporting to council, it is an independent group that is reporting to the state government, to council, and all other interested parties and all other interested groups that are in that emergency management field in Manningham, be it the CFA, be it the... Look, there are so many different groups. I'm not going to name them all, but in emergency management. Prior to this, I can recall on one particular occasion that affected my life, but on many occasions, the committees have been called into practice. I've seen the practice sessions that they go through, but I have seen these committees actually be called upon to act in behalf of council here, and I think it makes it very clear with the new legislation and how it's to operate, of the powers and the separation of powers, and this is an enabler. And I'd like to congratulate Councillor Lang for accepting, hopefully, the nomination to be on this committee, as indeed she's very connected to some of the most vulnerable areas of Manningham, being out in our non-urban area, where probably flood a little bit, but mainly bushfire is a ever prevailing thing in the summertime, and in the wintertime, probably a bit of tree falling and tree damage and other sorts of things in storms and that too. So indeed, the connections out there, that is where our CFAs and emergency management groups are and occupy a lot of the space. So it is important, but emergencies aren't just disasters like that. They do go to other sorts of things in our city as well. So this is a piece of an enabling policy here that we're following through with the state government on the establishment of this important committee.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Councillor Lightbody? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Lang?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to say I'm honoured to take this position, and also really recommend the reform that it describes, where that shared responsibility between relevant agencies is about planning for the emergency management of our municipality. There's nothing more important than supporting our community, and especially in time of need. So to see that we can work together with all the shared agencies in this capacity is very refreshing. So I support this reform and I accept the position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Therefore, I will put the motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. So we move on to 11.2, Delegated Authority to CEO, Contract for a Renewable Energy Power Purchase Agreement. Do I have a mover? Councillor
I'd like
Lightbody.
to move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Lightbody. So moved. Sorry, not so moved yet. Do I have a seconder?
Mr Mayor, I second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. So, Councillor Lightbody, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes. I think this bulk purchase of renewable energy is a fantastic example of how we can work with our other councils in Victoria to increase our negotiating power and achieve a win for the environment. In exploring this with 48 other councils, led by the City of Darebin, we will be able to, if signed, cut our emissions by 25% based on our 2008-2009 levels. This is a great project and I hope we can see more like it.
Thank you, Councillor Lightbody. Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to compliment Council for being proactive when it comes to their commitment to climate change emergency action and working with the 48 councils to investigate the procurement of renewable energy that is clean and at a competitive price, which demonstrates that Manningham Council supports urgent, strong climate change action. By powering 4 of Council's large buildings with emission-free renewable energy, it results in the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions for our environment and for our future generations.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Sorry, would anyone like to speak against the motion? I'll move on to for the motion. Thank you, Councillor Stephen Mayne.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm also very impressed with this proposal. Teamwork within the sector. Well done to Darebin for taking the lead and rounding up 48 other councils in this bulk buy project. We spend $1 million a year on electricity, so this is around 40% of our spend. And sometimes with renewable moves, it's like costs a bit more to be better for the environment, but the report is suggesting that we're likely to get a cost saving on the current contract. So good for the environment and good for the bottom line, which is where the whole renewable debate is tending to move even before we have a price on carbon. So I know when I was at the City of Melbourne that they did a 88 megawatt large renewable bulk buy project, which led to a large renewable project up near Ararat, and partnering in with a whole bunch of universities and inner city businesses. And that was considered a trailblazing exercise at the time. And it's great to see that we are doing a similar thing, although being more inclusive with many, many other councils, although not partnering with any non-council entities in this particular contract. We have different options with group procurement. We've got Procurement Australia, in which we're a small shareholder and they deliver some of our projects. We've got MAV procurement, and now we've got the Darebin-led model. So there's a whole range of interesting procurement models. It's great to do that, to get value for money for the taxpayer, and it's great for the environment. So congratulations to our officers and everyone who's worked on this project, and look forward to seeing the outcome of the tender process.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone else like to speak to the motion or against it? There being no other speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. That's the word. Okay, 11.3. Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group and Participating Councils Tender Evaluation and Contract Award Report for Landfill Services. Collaborative Procurement for Residual Waste Disposal Tender. Do I have a mover? Councillor Climate.
That the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Mr Mayor, I second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Climate, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, another good story, and there's a lot happening in the waste space, and there will be over the next few years. Just before I really highlight some positives about this, it's one thing to note that this does not include the state government landfill levy. So the current levy is $65.90 per tonne, it was to go up. The state government wanted it to go up last year, but because of COVID, they held it off till January 1st. And again, COVID was still with us, and so they've held off until the 1st of July this year, where it then goes up to $105 per tonne. With additional increments, well, I know that the year after is $20 extra a tonne, and I'm not really sure if it, I know it just keeps going. Now that's a state government a fee, but what this is about is through the Metro Waste, which council have been a member of, it was about councils getting together collaboratively, a joint tender process to seek for landfill services, because obviously you pay a certain amount but it doesn't cover everything. What we're covering and what this is about where we have control on costs. State government fees we have no control over. So this provides the best value for our council. Participating councils independently engaged in the services of one or more, and this really just highlights the cost implications, recommendations, and preferred landfill operators. It's quite simple. It's basically our current contract ends only in a few days, actually. Oh no, actually next month, sorry, 31st of March. But really this is of the essence. It's been a very stringent process. It's a great way of getting the best outcomes. And certainly a few years ago when there was issues with certain providers where councils weren't able to actually collect their rubbish, we were very lucky here in Manningham because we weren't with that particular provider. So there's been quite a robust process within that to make sure that that's why really we've got more than just one provider. It's really assuring us that safeguard that we'll always have a service. That service is 365 days a year and provides really the best outcomes for us in Manningham with where we have that constraint to do so. So again, a really good outcome. The officers have worked very hard on this. I think it's a really great outcome as we see that it's a really moving space, rapidly moving, and as you can see, some costs out of our control that are going through the roof. It's all about the cost shifting that ends up on local government. But this we can control, and I think we've done it well.
Thank you, Councillor Klein. Councillor Lang?
No further to add, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Sorry, would anyone like to speak against the motion? Anyone else like to speak for the motion? Being no other speakers, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Item 11.4, December 2020 Capital Works Status Report. Do I have a mover?
I move the recommendation as on the paper.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Stephen Mayne. Councillor Goff, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and this is part process and part permission, this particular motion tonight. As the process, it actually outlines there in the report how we've gone with our capital works program in this current financial year. Again, it has been a very difficult financial year because of COVID, because of restrictions, and because of some people not being able to get out there and getting things going. But the good news is that we've actually done fairly well in this last quarter with all of those difficulties and problems, albeit we haven't spent where we projected to spend. I think we're better off this year at the same time this year as we were last year. Exactly. So there's been a great improvement in difficult times, and I'd like to congratulate all of the people that work in that department for getting things going where possible with all the extra issues that have come through the COVID time. But also, councillors, this actually is putting increasing the funding to Petty's Reserve by over 35%. That's a rough, please correct me if I'm wrong. I thought 40% to start with, but it's not that much. But around 35% increase. And the report actually goes through the reasons for that, because there were difficulties and problems with the cost of the I suppose landfill or the flattening out and levelling and filling up areas of land and contamination within that. And often you may find contamination where you don't expect it. This wasn't a service station site. It wasn't one of the sites that you'd actually expect to find these sort of things, but there was contamination. That did add extra costs. There are vast extra costs. Now, I hope, I'm saying this is a bit of an overspend here, because in part of the report it actually talks about the fact that this is the worst case scenario one, so that we've got the money there allocated because this project is going. But it is going at the cost of another couple of projects. One of them, which is the Donvale Bowls, which we haven't even started on, and the Donvale Bowls wouldn't want it interrupting their normal programs and their summer programs. So that puts a few months delay for the next financial year onto that project. And the other project, what was it? MC squared, I think. Tiles were falling off the wall, whatever, or have to be, no, they're not. It was a fire safety one, wasn't it? It was a fire safety one there, and we're looking at putting that into the next financial year too. So they're just going to be delayed a couple of months in this particular report, and that's what we're endorsing basically with that. I hope they're the only things that we've done. Yeah, it is. So with that, I would like to leave that with councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Councillor Main, would you like to speak to the report, the recommendations?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. A couple of extra points. So we've spent 30% of the $47 million budget to the end of December, 14 million. So the run rate is below what you would need to spend the full amount, but councils across the state do have a great habit of accelerating capital spending as the year goes on. So we expect to see that and hopefully finish as close to the 47 million budget as we can get to. The Petties Reserve, as Councillor Goff mentioned, up from 8 million to 11.2. That's a little bit of an eye-popping change in the budget. So I think that reaches into the top 5 projects of all time in terms of spend on single projects after Aquarina, Mullum Stadium and MC Square as the 3 biggest that we've had in history. But as the report does explain, particularly the COVID difficulties and the soil contamination issues. The shuffling of projects, it's an interesting way councils budget, where if we have an overrun, we take from a project which has been delayed. And a couple of other projects that haven't been mentioned is the Ryshicks Reserve Cricket Pavilion was in the budget at 1.24 million. We've upped that to 1.5 million for the current financial year, borrowing 261,000 from the MC Squared exterior project. And Domini, which is a project that the residents of Park Orchards are very excited about, was in the budget at 1.27 million. Will finish at 1.7 million, and the $424,000 increase again has been borrowed from MC Squared. But just for the Donvale Bowls or Mullum Bowls, your project will still happen. We've just temporarily borrowed these funds, and it will be fully funded next year, as will the MC Square exterior project. Some good news is some extra grant funding that we weren't expecting that came through. So the 100,000 for the Jackson Court Parklet was an unexpected boost. I think it's 395,000 for Ryshicks Reserve Athletics Track Car Park, a big lick of external cash. Ruffy Lake Park access improvements, 141,000. And the biggest grant of all on the capital side was the Banksia Park Shared Path Bridge at 2.05 million. So that's 2.7 million in unexpected grant funding supplementing our capital works budget, which is always terrific to see. And obviously down the track, speaking of soccer and Petties Reserve, we're going to have a $10 million plus externally funded soccer facility at the golf driving range site on Templestowe Road as part of North East Link. So soccer is looking at going from being relatively underfunded to all of a sudden an embarrassment of riches with an $11 million facility at Petties and a 3-field facility at Templestowe Road, hopefully all delivered, open and operating within the next 4 or 5 years. So a healthy budget and capital works program. Thanks to the officers for putting this report together. It's tricky work managing all these competing works. Manningham has a high allocation to capital, which is good. We've got well-regarded facilities. We can always do more with footpaths and roads, and all that work is going. It's less sexy, it doesn't get talked about much, but we are doing some record spending on footpaths in particular and drainage, which is very important as well, doing the basics as well as the sporting projects that people often talk about more than the traditional capital works. So well done to the officers, and I commend the report.
Thank you, Councillor Main. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Lang?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this progress update regarding the Council's delivery of capital works program to ensure that Council is financially sustainable and to also ensure that Council assets are well maintained and development is met to meet the needs of our Manningham community, and that's pleasing. I also encourage where we are doing contingency allocations for capital works programs as well, because we all know the final cost to build, maintain or renovate anything is nearly always comes out more than our conservative budget. So therefore I encourage continued contingency budget allocations and also this update to show how we are looking after our community by maintaining council assets for their benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Would anyone else like to speak either against or for the motion? There being no other speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And so we move on to item 12, shared services, 12.1, COVID-19 community financial relief. Do I have a mover? Councillor Chen.
I move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Councillor Chen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. And COVID-19 has had significant impact and is still impacting our community, our small business, our health, and our well-being. Last year, Council was quick to respond to the impact to our community and approve an extensive $3.8 million COVID-19 community financial relief package over 2 financial years. Council also provided $250,000 of commercial lease relief for Council's commercial tenants for 6 months. And another $570,000 was approved to extend a range of community financial relief measures. Mr. Mayor, since the COVID restrictions were in place, small business have been hard hit. We listened to the small business in our municipality and members of Manningham Business Network. So on 15th of September last year, at the Council ordinary meeting, Council passed a subsequent motion, requested a report with financial relief and initiatives to support small businesses and community support for the consideration of the new Council after the 2020 election. The report includes a dedicated business grant program to support businesses to recover. This will assist businesses to make improvement and acquire new tools to be competitive online. The cost of the proposed business grant program would be $140,000 in 2020-21 budget and could be offset by the residual funds from Council's $1 million COVID-19 Community Financial Relief Fund budget allocation. Further support will be considered when Council develops the 2021-22 budget. As to sporting clubs, although Council waived rent, fees, utility costs for the winter 2020 season, some sporting winter clubs still suffer losses with significantly reduced outcome. The cost to Council will be funded with the existing 2020-21 adopted budget and will depend on the number of cases demonstrated financial hardship in accordance with Council's financial hardship criteria. So small business in Manningham and our sporting clubs in Manningham, Council hear you, and Council has made recommendation and try to assist you as much as we can. So I ask fellow councillors' support to this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chen. Councillor Goff, would you like to speak to the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think most of the things on this item have been covered very well by Councillor Chen with in particular details, but I just want to say that Council has gone out of its way in the past 12 months, and it's probably about a year ago that we were starting to, get a bit nervous about what was going to happen, and we just didn't know the effect and the extent of what was going to happen. But, we have spent on COVID 5% of our budget, of money that we get in. 5% of our rates has gone into this, and that's a very large percentage in the relief measures. And that's not putting value on workers that have been shifted to do other things within our organisation that we've been paying for to do other particular jobs in our community. And and it probably does take into account the lack of rent that we've got from a number of facilities. But I endorse the fact that we're here to have small programs to assist our local businesses and our local trading areas, but also the clubs that are volunteer clubs with kids, and losing a season in winter sport last year and the lockdown last week didn't really help. The surety of what you're going to go into the future, council is there to stand with those clubs that are in difficulty, to work with them so that really good resource of community, i.e. our community sporting clubs for our community, the kids of our community and the adults that live in here, not the professional sports, but the people that actually live here, are so vitally important to us. And that is very good. Let's hope we are over the worst of all of this, and let's hope that by the time it gets to next financial year, we're all vaccinated and we can get around and go about doing our own things. We've got to look on the bright side, and I'm looking on the bright side and hoping that's going to be able to occur. So with that, I ask for councillor support to endorse this particular motion.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Lang and then Councillor Diamonte.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and fellow councillors. Sorry that I am speaking a lot this evening. Council is important to our communities, and to help our communities connect, to help our local businesses grow, and to help our residents deliver health and well-being, and also to protect our environment. It is now more than ever that our community has to stay local, is enjoying their local businesses and their natural resources, and as well is trying to reconnect in a safe COVID-19 manner. Council can support our communities pre, post and during the pandemic, and has done so with COVID relief, community financial relief packages, commercial relief, lease relief to council tenants, as well as enabling trading outdoors. However, our community is still feeling the brunt and the impact of this pandemic. Therefore, I support the recommendation to assist those most in need and to investigate the proposed business grant program to support our local businesses' recovery and our residents. I support the opportunity for our winter clubs to apply to support cases where demonstrated financial hardship is felt for our children, for our communities, for our reconnection, for our health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Diamonte.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I absolutely believe that small business forms the backbone of our economy, our local economy and our national economy. They employ our children, they employ our people, they build skills, and I applaud Council for the COVID relief initiatives and for the proposed business grant program. We have 13,000 active businesses in Manningham. I was surprised we have 27,500 businesses that are registered. The vast majority of those businesses are small businesses with 5 people or less, and a third of them are at home. So they're businesses that we don't even see. They're businesses that are struggling, that are isolated, that for much of last year probably had to homeschool their children as well. And as Councillor Chen said, and as we've heard of the Manningham Business Network, many of them are still having issues accessing funds, having issues with cash flow. Many of them are still very lonely as well and disconnected. On the positive, many have been extraordinarily innovative, have pivoted, have come up with new operating models and are moving online. And getting to my point, I really do encourage my fellow councillors to support this proposed business grant program where it's funding businesses that need it to help build that online presence. And I hope if it is passed that I encourage them businesses to apply as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamonte. Any other speakers for or against? Being no other speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And carried unanimously. Thank you. Cheers. So we move on to item 13, Chief Executive Officer. 13.1, Community Engagement Policy. Do I have a mover?
Mr Mayor, I move that the council... Mr Mayor, I move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. Councillor Lang. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Lightbody. Councillor Lang, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. Mr Mayor and fellow councillors, it is clear that my passion, dedication to my community is one of my most important and vital assets of being on council. My community, engaging with them, listening and incorporating our residents' needs, interests and desires is abundantly important to me. This motion frames best practices in community engagement with the refinement of an inclusive community where everyone's voice and opinions are listened to and have equal bearing, with the refinement to add details on how our community can respond and how council supports community groups, and with the refinement to encourage residents to participate in council engagement activities. It is important that council build trust with our community, have supporting partnerships with our communities, and improve customer service so that there is a greater accountability, support for each other, community voice, and engagement outcomes. Community feedback is important to me, and establishing ways community wants to communicate with council. Therefore, I welcome the next stage to share the community engagement policy with our beloved communities so that they can have input, because we are all better off and perform best practices when we are all informed, consulted, involved, collaborated and empowered as people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Councillor Lightbody. Nothing to add? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Sorry, would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Chen.
I'm excited about the engagement policy. Council has done a lot in terms of community engagement. This is only to refine the process and to make it better. And I remember that since I came to council 4 years ago, my first year in council, and I identified a lot of gaps, and that is why I started a long journey, communicated with our com team, just how to improve the communication channels and the process with our CODE community. Because Manningham is a very, very diverse community. We have about 40% of our residents born in overseas, and 42% of our residents speak a language rather than English at home, and I'm one of them. So I can feel for the, sometimes just try just to get the information, but cannot really get into the details and how also confused about the process. But some residents may have noticed that council's website and Your Say Manningham are now available in a number of community languages. This change has been a long time coming, and I wish to congratulate our communication team, and I'm not sure whether they are here tonight. And your commitments to continuous improvement has been noted and appreciated. So I have received enormous appreciation, positive feedback from the community, especially from the core community, that I wish tonight to share the compliments with you, and you make me proud. Thank you, team, and well done.
Thank you, Councillor Chen. Are there any other speakers for or against the motion? There being no other speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. I think it's probably apt to actually inform the community about one of the outcomes of this policy, and that is the deliberative panel that we are in the process of setting up. And so if you are listening, and if you haven't read your Manningham Matters or you've missed the communication somehow, we've got a community panel happening, and where applications for expressions of interest close next Monday, 1st of March. This has been already, there's posters and, like I said, the Manningham Matters, and we've seen a really great level of engagement already in the expression of interest. And so I'm hoping that through, if you are watching this, and if you haven't applied, please consider it, because it is through that panel that we will be informed as councillors about what the priorities of the community are, and that will help us form our plan over the next 4 years. So those sessions for the community panel will be held between the 17th of March and the 28th of March, and we look forward to seeing some of you there. Thank you. So I'll move on to item 13.2, Manningham Quarterly Report, Quarter 2, October to December 2020. Do I have a mover?
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stephen Mayne, and do I have a seconder? Councillor Goff. Councillor Stephen Mayne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This is the statutory quarterly report for the 3 months to the end of December. And it's fair to say that Council, I think, has come through COVID and calendar 2020 in particularly good health. So the overall hit to our budget forecast now is around 3 million, where the projected surplus when we first handed the budget down in May last year was 12.63 million, and we're now predicting to finish with a surplus of 9.58 million. There are some overs and unders in that. As Councillor Chen mentioned earlier, we spent a couple of $1 million in COVID relief. That was extra on the outgoings. Our fees and charges were down 1.33 million because of COVID. I think Aquarina, with our joint venture with our management contract with Belgravia, there are hundreds of thousands in a hit in calendar 2020, and some lag effect as we wait for membership revenue to come back under a contract which is a profit share arrangement. On the upside, we received $2.7 million in grants that we weren't budgeting to receive. And we also, as I mentioned earlier, had the capital works grants, but primarily it was the Working for Victoria grants, which at its peak added, I think it was 42 staff to our workforce to do a whole series of programs funded by the government to get councils such as Manningham through COVID-19. So that was very much appreciated assistance from the state government. In terms of the report, it would be one option we might have for future reports is to include a quarterly balance sheet. So the last balance sheet we published is the actual annual report. We haven't done one as at the end of December. So as at the end of June, we had 65 million of cash in the bank and net assets of 2.15 billion, which is very healthy. I'd still argue in the top 10 in the state. And the cash balance won't have deteriorated particularly from the 65 million. Because the surplus hasn't moved particularly, and the cash balance was very steady year to year previously. So we do have some room to move if we want to step up capital works spending. We've got a very strong balance sheet. A couple of other possible additions we could include in future reports might be little things like identifying any developer contributions that have come in the quarter, It's always good where you can add a little bit of extra transparency and disclosure to your regular reporting. And very impressed on the councillor and CEO expenses front. The councillors look like they're going to come in many, many tens of thousands under budget collectively. And the CEO in the December quarter spent all of a big donut on his expenses, as is very transparently disclosed in the report. So ratepayers who are watching, the councillors and the senior management are not blowing your ratepayers' money, living the high life and lobbying large expense claims, which is always good to see. So a good report. We're in good shape, and thanks to the officers and all who've been before for leaving Manningham in this financial position after the terrifying experience of COVID-19, which has ravaged the balance sheets of many public sector entities, sovereigns, states, regions, councils across the world, and inner city councils that had parking revenue and managing their own aquatic facilities are tens of millions of dollars down. I think City of Melbourne overall it's up around 100 million worse off. So for us to only be 3 million worse off in a straight budget surplus sense shows that we've been very resilient and very well supported through this unprecedented pandemic.
Thank you, Councillor Mayne. Councillor Goff?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think Councillor Mayne has actually summarised the report very, very well. I'd like to congratulate the organisation for the presentation of the actual reports that go out. Easy to read through, but a couple of other details in behind would be handy if people can have access to those particular details, and I agree with Councillor Mayne with that. I do believe, though, that we're not this financially fantastic council with huge surpluses. Surpluses there are figures, and often I find that they're misread. And indeed, some of those figures are restricted amounts of money that we do need to have on tap. And also with the financially viable status that we have as a council, with the state government traffic light signals of councils fitting into all the different categories, we're missing out on a couple of these categories because we're very close to the line. And I think it was one of them was the fact of having too little amount, and I could be corrected on this, but I think it was too little in carrying money in the bank forward that made us an amber instead of a green in a particular area of our traffic light situation. So we do need to be I'm very cognisant that we do need to be extremely vigilant on money and not just rush into making decisions here at council or changing and awarding things willy-nilly at whim, but really looking into the actual effects, because that money that we spend in those areas, and I'm sure that the organisation will be very careful, and I hope the organisation is looking at what is happening in New South Wales at the moment with Central Coast, and there was another council in New South Wales needing to put their rates up 32%, and well, the other one was 25%, to cover the extravagancies and expenses and things that trading beyond their means, and have brought in a situation of despair into those communities. And it's a very fine dial, financial responsibility. It's not a set of dials you can play with, and I relate it, Mr Mayor, to the lunar landing game that used to be out in the 70s or 80s, and you'd have this little space shuttle landing on the moon. It'd often crash because you turned the dial just that fraction too far on this one, or you played around with this dial. Keeping council on a good path of sustainability is a very involved and careful process, and rash moves can make you void and unable to do the important things for our community into the future. So a little bit of luxury now on the credit card, and a lifetime of poverty after that, and not being able to do things without attacking everybody. So I just have a word of caution about a celebration of a rich council.
Thank you, Councillor Goff. Are there any speakers against the motion? Any other speakers for? Being no other speakers, I'll put that motion. Those in favour? Yep, carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 13.3, Councillor Code of Conduct. Do I have a mover? Councillor
Yes, I
Diamante?
move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder?
Mr Mayor, I second the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And Councillor Diamante, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So my role as a councillor and that of my colleagues is to represent the interests of the people and organisations that make up the Manningham community. To do this, we must act with empathy, we must be accountable, we must be transparent, and we must be ethical. This code of conduct reflects those values and that behaviour and establishes a strong working relationship for us as councillors with the community and also with council administration. And while myself and my fellow colleagues and council shouldn't have to rely on a code of conduct to tell us how to behave, I do think it's almost like a performance contract or a performance agreement that we have with our community on the values and behaviours that they should expect from us as councillors. So I want to thank the officers for the collaborative and constructive approach they took in developing this code of conduct with us, and I encourage fellow councillors to support the code of conduct.
Thank you, Councillor Diamante. Councillor Lang, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is highly important to us all as your 2020 to 2024 council that we all provide good governance, demonstrate we are Manningham values, and that we are honest, transparent and accountable. Therefore, I encourage council to support the Councillor Code of Conduct. It sets high standards as elected representatives in fostering good working relationships with our communities, with each other and with council. And I thank council for the design and the establishment of our Councillor Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Are there any speakers against the motion? Are there any other speakers for the motion? I'll put that motion. Those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Again, thank you, councillors. So in light of that, I think it's appropriate that we sign the document now. So I'm going to call, in order of this list, Anna Chen, Councillor Anna Chen, to sign the Code of Conduct. Yep. You can bring your own pens. I'm next, and then we have Councillor Diamante. Councillor Goff. Yeah, that's all right. Councillor Clonett. Councillor Lang. Councillor Lightbody. Councillor Laura May. And last but not least, Councillor Stephen May.
Ivan Milat.
Thank you, councillors. That will be included in the minutes, I assume. Thank you. So we will move on to item 13.4, appointment of authorised officers, Planning and Environment Act 1987. Do I have a mover? Councillor Laura May.
I move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Clonett. Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Councillor May, Councillor Kleinert, anyone would like to speak for or against the motion? I'll put that motion. Those in favour, and that is approved unanimously. And item 13.5, informal meetings of councillor. Could I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Chen.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the recommendation be adopted.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Laura Main, thank you. Councillor Chen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just a little bit. Some community members thought that the councillors only have once a month council meeting. That's all. And as you can see from this minutes that we have actually informal meeting, about 10 meetings in a month, let alone the formal meetings, community engagements, community events, you name it. So a good report, and and the community can see how hard have we done, and we work for the whole community and council at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chen. Councillor May? Anyone would like to speak against the motion or for it? Those in favour, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, and that is carried unanimously. Again, thank you, councillors. Item 13.6, documents for sealing. Do I have a mover? Councillor Kleinert.
That the recommendation be adopted with the addition of the following agreements: Lease Council and Park Orchards Community House and Learning Centre Incorporated, Part 568 to 574, Park Road, Park Orchards, Crown Land. Consent to build over an easement agreement under the Section 173 of the Planning and Environment Act of 1987. Council and Miss Anne F. Fuller, 17 Roseland Grove, Doncaster.
Sorry, that was F. Muller.
F. Muller.
Yeah, that's right.
What did I say? Sorry.
I'll put that motion to the councillors. Those in favour, and carried unanimously. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to find a seconder. Councillor?
I second the motion,
Thank you.
Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. And I will now put the motion officially, and that is carried unanimously. And item 14, urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. Item 15, councillors' question time. Councillors, does anyone wish to raise any questions at this time? I have Councillor Lang.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have one question this evening. I just wanted to say thank you to Mr Mayor, CEO and Director of City Services for attending an organised walkabout of the 100 acres guided by Park Orchards Ratepayers Association on a very warm and sunny afternoon. I'd like to thank them for their voluntary, professional and open-minded community consultation. Can I please ask the Director of City Services to provide an update on the next steps for the restoration and fire preparedness of the 100 acres Park Orchards?
Thank you, Councillor Lang. I will direct that to the Director of City Services. Thank you. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Lang. I've actually been in contact with members of PORA just this week, in fact yesterday. So I've arranged a follow-up meeting with representatives from PORA to meet with them in the coming weeks and talk to them about the management plan and review of that going forward. So there's a real opportunity for us to work together to make some improvements in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Are there any other questions? Councillor Chen.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, we noticed that the Manningham's population and apartment developments are growing. Large residential buildings are expected to one day build. In the meantime, more people are using parks all day, not just between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. as current planning laws assume. Especially in winter season, when people need and want to access sunlight most. The existing planning provisions may not be able to protect parks from shadow. And the future Hepburn Reserve is a classical example. Could a report be brought to a strategic briefing session regarding the possibility of including protection for sunlight access to local parks into our planning scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. I will refer that to either the CEO or the Director of Planning and Community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. Through you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, we can definitely bring a report back to Council outlining what opportunities there might be to achieve that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No? Great. Okay. Item 16, confidential reports. There are no confidential reports.